I maj 2017 fattade kommunstyrelsen i Malmö beslut om att arbeta med CTC, Communities That Care, vilket är en vetenskapligt grundat övergripande system för preventionsarbete, och det är tänkt att det ska skapa goda uppväxtvillkor för barn och unga. Malmö stads mål, så man kan ta del av detta på stadens hemsida, hur man har tänkt sig, det är kortfattat att CTC ska användas som ett arbetssätt i hela stan inom ett antal år. Men i första skedet så införs metoden i 5 utvalda lokala områden. CTC was developed by Professor G. David Hawkins through decades of research and collaboration with communities across the United States. Professor Hawkins had studied the etiology and prevention of problem behaviors among children and adolescents for over 30 years. But how can prevention science help community prevent problems before they start? Please join me in welcoming David Hawkins.
Thank you, Annika. Thank you, Annika. Oh, how nice. My voice has arrived with me. I am at such a disadvantage. I speak no Swedish. You all seem to be able to speak English, and I am appreciative of that because it has been difficult for me to be in meetings in the last day or so and not know what people are saying. And so I appreciated Annika's introduction to me as well in English. My father-in-law was an Irish immigrant to America. If he were here, he would introduce me slightly differently. He'd say, "I'd like you to meet my son-in-law, Dave. He's a doctor, but it's not the kind does you any good." If you'll let me indulge in a story, many years ago in the 1970s, my wife and I visited Ireland for the first time together, visiting her relatives in County Roscommon. They didn't have a telephone at the time, and when we arrived there, we knocked on the door of the house, hoping that they would know we were arriving. Mrs. Mahan throws open the door and says, "Oh, we're so glad you've come home," and made us feel so welcome. And we were there talking and drinking and eating and playing music together. And Maureen said, "Isn't there an Uncle Jack?" And she said, "Oh, yes, your Uncle Jack, Mahan. He's coming back from town in the donkey cart. You go up on the road, you'll see him soon enough." And so we did, and there was this older man being pulled along by a donkey in a cart, and Maureen starts up to him. He says, "You're Kathleen's daughter." And she said, "That's right." And he says to me, "And who are you?" And I said, "I'm David Hawkins. I'm Maureen's husband." He says, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from the United States, from America." And he says, "Before that." And I kind of knew what he wanted, and so I began to work my way back through the legacy of the Hawkinses, and every time I'd stop, he said, "Before that." And finally he said, "Well, before that, I think Uncle Jack Hawkins is an English name from County Cornwall in England." Uncle Jack Mahan never spoke to me again. It's a true story. He's passed from this earth, God rest his soul. But that story just reminds me how easy it is to fail to communicate across cultural boundaries, even if you're members of the same family. I'm here today because I care about the healthy development of all children, regardless of where they came from before that. When I say before that, I also want to say that I wasn't always a university professor. Before that, I was a probation officer working with delinquent young people. The kids I had on probation, for them, school wasn't a place of learning and education and excitement and engagement. It was a place of failure and alienation. And my job was to try to help them get back engaged in school. For my kids, family wasn't necessarily a place of warmth and affection. Often, family was a place of conflict and alienation and anger. And my job was to help them be able to work together as a family so this young person could stay in the community and not be sent to an institution. I began to ask myself a very important question, which is, isn't there something that people should have done before this point in time, before these kids have found the reinforcing properties of drugs and learned how pleasurable it is to take things that you want without having paid for them, etc.? And I became a recovering probation officer. I left the field with a healthy respect for those of you who work with delinquent youngsters and adults. But I really became interested in the concept of prevention. Could we prevent problems like delinquency and substance abuse before they happen? I'm going to have to do this from time to time, but I don't have to stay here to do it, so maybe we can do it this way. So I got to the University of Washington. We did a study. How many delinquency prevention programs had there been in the United States? There had actually been 9 true experimental studies of preventing delinquency before it happens in the U.S. None of them was effective. As of that time, a few years ago to me, to some of you it seems like ancient history, but in 1980, we didn't know how to prevent delinquency. If anyone came and told you they knew how to do it at this conference, you should shout them down, because there was no evidence that we could do it. And in fact, the strategies we used for prevention of substance abuse were information strategies. We give kids pictures of drugs. We take boards into school and give kids pictures of drugs and information about drugs. We'd have baggies of marijuana and we'd pass that around and hope it got back to the front. And that was our program for substance abuse prevention. Make them know what the dangers of drugs were. When we were interested in preventing crime, we would take young delinquents to institutions, to prisons, and we let the people who were there as lifers yell at them and tell them how awful it was to have to live in this prison. And when people did evaluations of those programs, they found the information programs actually increased drug use in the year following the preventive intervention compared to kids who we just left alone. Scared Straight increased delinquent behavior in the year after kids got yelled at by the lifers. It was like they said, oh, I see, someday I'll get to yell at kids from the safety of a prison cell. We learn from that untested good ideas can actually make things worse rather than better. My partner in research and I, Rick Catalano and I, began to ask the question, who has been effective in prevention? And when we thought about it, we realized that people who were studying heart and lung disease, cardiovascular disease, had in fact found a way to think seriously and scientifically about prevention. Based on the Framingham, Massachusetts study that had followed people longitudinally over time, they had identified factors that, when present earlier in development, increase the risk. And we all know what they are, the risk factors for cardiovascular disease in America or in Europe. Just yell them out if you know. Risk factor for heart disease, lung disease. Come on, somebody tell me. Smoking is one. We know it is. Whether we do it or not, we know it's a risk factor. What's another one? Okay, drug use. Another one is a sedentary lifestyle, if you don't exercise. Another one is a family history. Another one is a diet high in fat, where you don't get enough vegetables, etc. What we realize is that some of the risk factors are malleable, things you can change. You cannot smoke. You can exercise. And today in America, at least, if you don't exercise, at least you feel guilty. We know we're supposed to do that. So the idea is that if we want to prevent a problem before it happens, we have to address the factors that predict that problem. Since there's not a problem there, we can't intervene in the problem. We've got to address the predictors of that problem. Well, in the area of delinquency and substance use, there have been longitudinal studies like David Farrington's Cambridge Youth Study in the UK, Del Elliott's study, a National Youth Survey in the United States, that have followed young people forward over time and actually identified factors when present increase the risk of behavioral health problems and other factors when present that decrease the risk of those behavioral health problems. And so we realized that if we could identify risk and protective factors and develop preventive interventions that reduce risk and enhance protection, we might be able to prevent delinquency and substance abuse and other behavioral health problems. We've made a lot of progress in the last 35 or 40 years. First of all, we know what the risk and protective factors are that predict these problem behaviors. We have seen researchers across the world develop preventive interventions that reduce risk and enhance protection and have had positive impacts on behavioral health problems. And we've learned that communities can make a big difference in prevention with whole populations of young people. And I want to just review that information with you. The first thing I want to share with you is that what we've learned about risk and protective factors is that there are risk factors in every domain of life, in the community, in the family, within school experiences, as well as within the individual and the individual's peers. And in fact, there are a variety of behavioral health problems that are predicted by these risk factors. I'm not going to spend a lot of time reviewing the risk factors, but just to remind you that some risk factors are characteristics of the neighborhood or community in which young people grow up. Other risk factors are characteristics of the family experience of young people. There's a risk factor here I'll just give you as an example. It's family management problems, and there are 3 dimensions to this. If the adult caretakers, regardless of the structure of the family, if the adults in a family fail to set clear expectations for children in that family, what's okay and not okay in this family, if they fail to monitor their children to see if they're doing what is expected and not doing what is not expected, and if they are excessively severe and inconsistent in discipline. Sometimes a child does something and nothing happens, and another time the child does the same behavior and may even get hit for this. This is the connection between child abuse and delinquency, child abuse and substance abuse. We know that if parents, if adult caretakers, regardless of the structure of the family, if adult caretakers are explicit and clear, this is what we expect of you as a child, if they monitor children in developmentally appropriate ways, it doesn't mean you have to go through their drawers and see if there's any drugs in there, but it does mean when they come home in the evening that you may want to give them a hug and kiss, because if you do, you'll know if they've been smoking or drinking. That's monitoring. And if parents are moderate and consistent in discipline, that will reduce risk for every one of these behavioral health problems, including depression and anxiety. There are also risk factors in young people's school experiences and also risk factors within the individual community. If you don't see a check at the intersection of a row and a column, it doesn't mean it's definitively not a risk factor. We may not have enough research to know that. But if you do see a check there, it means that has been shown in at least 2 high-quality studies to increase the risk of the problem behavior in the column. And that means that could be a really good potential target for preventive intervention if you can change it. Risk is important, but risk reduction is not enough. We also need to enhance the protective factors that, when present, appear to reduce problems in young people. The research is pretty clear that some of these are characteristics of individuals. Children who are born with high intelligence are to some degree protected by that intelligence. Kids who have a bounce-back temperament, they bounce back easily from adversity, they're protected by that. Children who have good social skills, a good sense of humor, etc., they're able to negotiate situations better and avoid antisocial and behavioral health problems. However, there are also characteristics of the social environment, the family, the school, the community, that make a big difference. And in our work, we began to say, let's think about how we could organize the work and the research on protective factors in order to strengthen protection in each social domain in which young people develop. So if you don't remember anything else I say today, I'm going to ask you to think about, if you have 5 fingers on either of your hands, think about how you could enhance protective factors in your experiences with the young people with whom you interact on a daily basis. You don't have to wait for CTC or anything else that we'll talk about. You could begin to use this today. The first thing I want to recognize is that the goal is healthy behaviors for all children, and that there are differences in individuals. My children are peas from the same pod, as far as I know, and they're different kids yet. My son Quinn has a resilient temperament. He bounces back easily from adversity. My daughter Nora was a shy child when she was young. And if I were talking as loudly as I'm talking to you right now to Nora, she would go hide in her room from me because she just said, Dad's just being too noisy and loud and so on. People change. Over time, Nora's become a very good person socially, etc. She's a very successful adult. She worked at the White House before this current president. And so people can change. But I want you to just remember that you need to think about the individuals that you're interacting with, because they'll react somewhat differently to different ways of doing the things that I think are important in building protection. The first thing that's really important is that young people at every developmental stage need opportunities for active involvement in pro-social interactions with others. So if a mother has an infant and she always leaves the infant in a car seat or in a playpen and doesn't pick up that infant, she's not increasing interactions for active involvement. Am I making sense with this? If a first grader doesn't ever get to feed the pets in the classroom, that child doesn't have that opportunity for active engagement. If in junior high school, a 13, 14-year-old child is never asked, what do you think we should have on in the park for children's recreational activities, they don't have an opportunity for active involvement. So that's the first thing. Opportunities for active involvement that are developmentally appropriate are key to successful protection. The second thing is young people themselves need to learn the skills that are needed for their involvements. So if you let the first grader feed the gerbils, but the first grader doesn't know you also need to water the gerbils, it may not be a successful week of gerbil feeding for that first grader. So opportunities and skills are things that we need to ensure that young people have. We can provide the opportunities, we can help them learn the skills. We need to ensure that they have those skills. And the third thing is a consistent system of recognition or reinforcement for skillful performance. Now this is where the individual characteristics may come in. With my son Quinn, when he came home from school and he had a great report card from the teacher, I could say, Quinn, that's fantastic. Look at your grades. I'm so proud of you. He would love that, to hear that. Nora, if she came home with a good report card from school, I couldn't say that to Nora. She wouldn't like to have that much direct attention. But I could say to my wife, Maureen, Nora's mom, wow, Maureen, do you see Nora's grades? She's got all really good grades. Nora'd be over there beaming. But she didn't want that direct attention. She just wanted to hear that I was proud of her. So the way we do these things may differ depending on the individual characteristics of the young person. Am I doing okay with this? Give me a signal if it's making sense to you. Thank you. Okay. All right. So why is this so important? Because opportunity, skills, and recognition build a sense of connection or bonding between that young person and the people who provide those opportunities and skills. If my first grade teacher lets me feed the gerbils even though I'm not the smartest kid in the class, and I feed and water the gerbils, and at the end of the week the gerbils are running around in the little circle that the gerbils always run around in, and they're happy, and the teacher says, wow, class, look at how happy the gerbils are at the end of the week. And you know what? Dave fed and watered the gerbils this week, and let's give Dave a hand for feeding and watering the gerbils. And everybody claps for me in the class. How do I feel about that teacher? How do I feel about that class? I say, I like these people. I like this class. So bonding develops from opportunity, skills, and recognition. And bonding is so important because it provides the motivation to live according to the standards offered by that group. So bonding was the fourth protective factor. The fifth one is clear and explicit standards for healthy behavior. This is what's okay in our family, and this is what's not okay in our family. If a teacher has recognized and rewarded me for feeding the gerbils, and then at the end of the week says, and remember class, we have homework, we have a reading assignment this weekend, I want you to do your reading, I'm more likely to do my reading because the teacher said that's the expectation. I like my teacher. I like my class. I'm going to do what's expected. Am I doing okay with this? So you can do these things. Just remember, with any child you interact with, can I increase opportunities for involvement? Do they have the skills they need to do this? How can I recognize and reinforce them in a way that they'll feel like they got recognition and reinforcement, because that will make them feel more committed to the values that I think are important for them to live by. And then we need to explicitly communicate those values. Mrs. Reagan, a long, long time ago in the United States, said, just say no. Well, that's a great message to kids who care about what Mrs. Reagan thinks. But there are a lot of kids in America who didn't care about that, and so her message didn't translate to those young people. It's important to have all five of these characteristics to build protection. What we know now is that over the last 35, 38 years, we've seen randomized controlled experimental studies in which every one of these behavioral health problems of young people has actually been prevented. We also have seen the development of policies that are showing the effectiveness of a risk and protective focused approach to prevention. And if you don't know this last thing here, there's been wonderful cost-benefit work done from the Washington State Legislature by the Washington State Institute for Public Policy. And I really encourage you to look at the website of the Washington State Institute for Public Policy, the cost-benefit analyses there. It doesn't translate directly to Sweden because the costs of crime are different, the costs of institutionalizing delinquents are different, the benefits are different as well. And so but that gives you an idea that, in fact, these preventive interventions have been tested and shown to be effective. Many of them are cost beneficial. That is, they cost less than the benefits that they produce for the individuals who get them and for society at large. Some of these programs have been effective in reducing multiple behavioral health problems of young people. I want to just give you a couple of examples. There was one called Botvin's Life Skills Training. Have you ever heard of this? If you've heard of Botvin's Life Skills Training, would you raise your hand? Okay, so this is new to a lot of people here. This is a program that's offered and provided by teachers in middle schools. That is when children are 12 to 14 years old. In the first year, they get 15 sessions. In the second year, 10 sessions. Year 3, 5 sessions. The teacher uses interactive methods of instruction. The teachers are trained to provide this, and they get technical assistance in doing this. I don't know, yes, I think you can see this. These are the reductions that have been shown in experimental studies with random assignment to conditions, of classrooms to conditions, in not only tobacco, alcohol, marijuana use, methamphetamine use, etc., but also reduction in aggression, physical aggression, verbal aggression, delinquent behavior, and fighting. So this program, teaching children the basic life skills they need to survive as adolescents in society, which include things like relaxation skills, stress reduction skills, as well as social interaction skills, as well as social resistance skills to things that you don't want to be involved in doing that your peers may encourage you to do. Benefit cost ratio in the United States is positive, producing over $17 in benefits for every dollar spent on this program. And they've done Monte Carlo simulations to see if you had these data and you ran them repeatedly, how many times would you produce positive benefits over the cost of the program? 2/3 of the time you would do that. Another program is a parenting program for parents of kids aged 10 to 14. It's called Strengthening Families 10 to 14. It's 7 weekly 2-hour sessions. The parents spend time in an hour, the kids spend time in an hour, and then they come together for the second hour of that session. That program, you can just see the description there. If you look at this, you can see that compared to a control group, drunkenness is reduced by 22%. That is kids reporting having been drunk. Kids illicit drug use, 19% reduction. And the rate of delinquent offending has been cut in half by this program. And moreover, we're very concerned in the United States about opioid abuse. Right now, we're losing a lot of people to opioids. And opioid deaths. And if you look at this, you follow these kids up. Remember, they're getting this program when they're 12 to 14 years old. Look at 11 years later. Look at the narcotics use of lifetime prescription of or misuse of opioid drugs. 13% of the control group had done that by the time they were 25, compared to only less than 5% of the full intervention group. We can prevent opioid misuse by engaging early with young people and ensuring that they have the skills, the opportunities, the recognition, and the reward to avoid these kinds of health compromising behaviors. Again, a positive benefit cost ratio of $5, and again, a positive chance of success when you do this. Policies also make a difference. I would just for an example, tobacco clean air restrictions. I will tell you that if this were the US, no one would be smoking in this room. This is Sweden, no one's smoking in this room. I would tell you if this were 15 years ago in the US, there'd be ashtrays on the chairs for us to smoke. And I would submit that I bet that was true here 15 years ago as well. We have said that we aren't going to allow that. Policy makers have said we aren't going to allow people to do this because it it increases secondhand smoke, and people who don't even smoke are being affected by this. And so we're going to outlaw smoking in public places. And what that actually has done, good quality studies show, it's reduced the uptake of new smokers, the number of people who begin smoking. Because being in a public place with other people who are smoking, in a bar or a pub or a tavern or a place like this, and other people are smoking, it's easy for you, if you're a non-smoker, everybody else is smoking, hey, could I bum a cigarette? And that's how a lot of people get started, through other people using and borrowing cigarettes from them. So these policies make a big difference, as well as programs. So some things that we've learned from this work. I'm sorry, I have to keep looking at what you're looking at. The first thing is reduce risk factors, enhance protection. The second thing is, if there have been tested effective programs and policies that we know have worked in other places, the best bet, the safest investment, is to use those kinds of programs and policies in your own situation, in your own community, and where we can combine evidence-based policies and programs for greatest effects. We know this, and yet across America, and perhaps in Sweden as well, we do not consistently use evidence-based, tested and effective programs and policies. We do lots of other things that we think are good ideas and that we think make sense, but haven't been tested and proven to work. We've also learned that communities themselves can be viable organizations or places, contexts, active ingredients for actually preventing these behavioral health problems of young people. And I want to turn to that now, because the fact is that different communities are different from each other. One size doesn't fit all. We can't say today in America, or I think in Sweden, oh, just use this program. This is the magic bullet. If you just do this thing, you're going to prevent substance abuse and delinquency. And the reason is that different communities have different norms and values. In some communities, adults will say, what's the big deal if people drink alcohol? You know, I started drinking when I was young. That didn't cause me any problems. In other communities, people say, you know what, we've read the literature, and we know that the earlier children start to drink, the greater is the risk that they will develop behavioral health problems. Not all people will, but there's an increased risk of early initiation. So we're going to delay initiation. We're going to try to delay initiation. Different norms and values in different communities. Different problems in different communities. In America, in middle-class suburbs, upper middle-class suburbs where there's quite a lot of money, children are very likely, white children are very likely to start drinking and using marijuana because they've got the resources to do it. In America, in low-income African-American communities, children are much less likely to start drinking than our white kids in the suburbs because they don't necessarily have the resources, and perhaps their parents have recognized the problems of alcohol use in their own community and say, no, it's not okay for you to do this as a young person. So there are different behavior problems that people face in different communities, different levels of risk and protection, and different resources and capacities to deal with those kinds of problems. And that means we need to not tell people this is the intervention, but we need to develop tools that people can use to use these advances of prevention science that we've been talking about. There are two operating systems for prevention that have been tested and shown to be effective. One of them is called PROSPER. The other is called Communities That Care. When I say operating system, I want you to think about your phone. On your phone, unless you have an operating system, you can't get to the right application. You may want to take a picture, or you may want to talk to your friends, or you may want to get on WhatsApp because you don't want to have to use data when you're traveling internationally. The point is those are different applications, and you need an operating system to get to the right application. Communities That Care is an operating system that helps communities get to the right application for their needs. And so I'm not going to talk more about PROSPER. You can learn about it from the website, but I know a lot about Communities That Care because I developed it with Rick Catalano and many colleagues across the US. So let me just tell you what the characteristics of this are. First of all, it allows and helps communities use the advances of prevention science to guide their prevention work. It allows communities to measure the actual levels of risk and protection that young people in that community are exposed to, and I'll tell you about that in a bit. It enhances protection because the social development strategy I talked to about earlier everyone learns about the social development strategy and how to apply it in their own lives with their own families, or children in their classroom with their teachers, or children on their probation workload at their probation officers. It matches the community profile of risk and protection with preventive interventions that have been shown to reduce the risk factors that are most prevalent in the community and enhance protective factors. It focuses on ensuring if you use a program or a policy that you implement it well so that it is really there in place and not just in name. And finally, the fact that this is owned and operated by the community itself, not pushed in on the community, but the community uses these tools, uses this operating system to make its own decisions, I think leads to sustainability, and we'll see that in a little bit. It's organized in this way. The key leaders of the community, what I mean by key leaders, people who control resources and shape opinion. So the mayor of a city, the city council, the chief of police, the school superintendent, business leaders in that community, media leaders in that community, religious leaders in some communities. Those are all people who control resources and shape opinion. Those people are really important because if the key leaders of a community say, we're going to use this operating system, and we really want to reduce risk, enhance protection using evidence-based programs, we're going to do it well, and we're going to measure our progress every couple of years to make sure that we're making progress. When key leaders say that, the outcomes of children in their community are significantly improved. So key leaders are important, but the key leaders are busy doing a lot of things, and what their job is to identify and create a coalition, a community board that is responsible for the work of implementing this operating system. The community board, depending on the size of the community, sometimes it's a neighborhood within a larger city, sometimes it's a whole town. That community board is responsible for carrying out the work of communities that care. And they do that through the creation of work groups that do pieces of the whole process. And there is a very important role for a paid person as a facilitator coordinator whose job it is to help the community board successfully implement the Communities That Care process. There are 5 phases to Communities That Care. The first 4 phases take place in the first year, and the 5th phase takes place from then on, except that we repeat this. It's shown as a cycle because every couple of years communities revisit the activities of this process to make sure they're making progress. So this is what happens in the first year of Communities That Care. Get started. People like yourselves say, hey, this sounds interesting. Let's talk to some of the key leaders in our community about what we might do with regard to this. And you can see the trying to get people involved is what's happening in this first phase. The second phase is get organized. This is when the coalition or the board begins to become created, in which they learn the prevention science constructs that we've been talking about, and they write a vision statement. Here's the vision for our community, and they organize work groups to carry out the work of the Communities That Care. And they develop a timeline for how are we going to do this, how long is it going to take us to do this. They then develop a community profile. They actually conduct a survey of all the kids that are willing to participate in the public schools. It's an anonymous survey, and that survey in a 50-minute class period is able to measure virtually all of the malleable risk and protective factors that kids can talk about effectively. They can't talk about the economic conditions of their family very well, but they can talk about whether their parents know where they are and who they're with if they're not home. So there are things that can be measured, risk and protective factors, as well as their own self-reports in anonymous surveys of their own behavior. Have you used marijuana? Have you used alcohol? In the last year, how much have you done? Have you engaged in these various delinquent behaviors? So that assessment develops a profile of the levels of risk and protection that children are experiencing, and at the same time, they identify existing resources in the community that are already addressing risk and protective factors. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to build on what's in our community by filling gaps in services for preventive services. And they create a plan that has measurable outcomes and that says, this is what we're going to do. These are the programs and interventions we're going to use. From then on, we see changes in the risk factors that community has prioritized. We expect to see those within 2 to 3 years, and those will continue to be observable. And by the 3rd or 4th year, we should see actual reductions in behavioral health problems. So if you're looking for a silver bullet that within 6 months is going to change delinquency and substance abuse among young people in your community, I can't give you that with communities of care. It's going to take a while to build the capacity to actually change the community in ways that reduce risk and enhance protection for all young people. We've had the opportunity to do a randomized controlled trial of communities of care. We matched communities within states. These are the states that are involved in the trial, the lighter colored ones. And within each state, there are at least 2 communities that were matched on crime statistics and on socioeconomic conditions, and then randomly assigned after the mayor, police chief, and school superintendent of those communities agreed to be randomly assigned to either get training in communities of care or to go on with business as usual. So we have 12 experimental communities and 12 CTC communities and 12 control communities. And we followed all the 5th graders, those are about 10-year-old kids starting at age 10, who were in those communities, and we've been surveying them annually through the age 18 and then every 2 to 3 years after that. What we saw in this experimental trial is at the end of the 3rd year, you're looking now at all the protective factors that I talked to you about before in different social domains. So in the community, opportunities for active involvement in the community, recognition or rewards for active involvement in the community. Do the people in the community, there's a question that people in the community recognize me when I do a good job and compliment me for it. Kids can say yes or no to that. If they say yes, that means they perceive rewards from community involvement. This is high neighborhood attachment. They like their neighborhood. I want you to use the interocular test here. That's your eyeballs. And I want you to look at the red lines and the blue lines. Each of these is measuring one construct. So are the blue lines higher than the red lines, or are the red lines higher than the blue lines? Blue lines are higher. That's right. First row, good answer. You got it right, sir. The blue lines are higher on every one of these protective factors, every one of these. The overall level of protection is higher after 3 years, as reported by students who don't know they're part of an experiment, in CTC communities compared to control communities. We've changed the experience of young people. They say, I'm getting recognized for being a good kid. My teacher recognizes me when I try in school. My parents like it when I'm doing well, and they let me know about it. And children reporting better social skills, more commitment to pro-social values, etc. At that same point in time, we find significant reductions in both alcohol and tobacco kinds of behavior and binge drinking. That's 5 or more drinks in a sitting, basically, and in delinquent behavior. Significant reductions in those things after 3 years. When we follow up those young people at the end of high school, that's 12th grade, about age 17 or 18, you can see again the significant reductions in each one of these outcomes in these communities. These are community-wide effects. This isn't just effects on 15 kids that were in some project. This is community-wide effects, all the children in that community, regardless of whether they were in a particular project or a particular classroom, etc. And when the Washington State Institute for Public Policy did a review of the benefits versus the costs of communities of care, they found that the program, the operating system, when implemented in communities, produces a $5.31 or 13-cent benefit for every dollar spent on it. And that's after they cut the effect sizes in half, because Rick Catalano and I were involved in the experiment, and they say, well, these guys, they may be special, or maybe they're cheaters, and so we're going to just say they only got half the effects they did. You still get benefits well beyond the cost of the program from this kind of an intervention. This is a neighborhood of the city of Denver. You've all heard of Denver, Colorado, Rocky Mountain High. Anyway, that community within Denver, a disadvantaged community, Montbello, at this point had been doing communities of care for 3 years. And you can see the reductions in violent behavior, in aggressive behavior, in victimization, as well as in delinquent behavior in the Montbello neighborhood after 3 years of implementation of CTC. I also want to share with you one community, Franklin County, Massachusetts, that's actually been doing community care since 2003. They identified certain risk factors, laws favorable and norms favorable to drug use and handguns as a risk factor they wanted to focus on. They were concerned about that family management risk factor, so they looked at poor family supervision, poor family discipline, and they also didn't like the fact that parental attitudes favorable towards antisocial behavior were somewhat elevated, and so they picked those as the risk factors they wanted to focus on. They created work groups focusing on various aspects of the community that would help them reduce those targeted risk factors. And what you can see from 2003 through 2015, they've been at this for actually now 16 years, because they're still doing it in 2018, but the family management problems have decreased over time from about 65% reporting those, or 70% reporting those kinds of things, to 60%. I hope my eyes are doing a good job on this. But you can see the reductions in these problem behaviors, in these risk factors as reported by children themselves in the community as time goes on. And what that has meant is a continuing decline, not always just perfectly linear. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's a little down. But what you can see is significant reductions in alcohol use, binge drinking, marijuana use, less in marijuana use because the legalization that we're experiencing and pressure towards that in the United States, change in norms about that, and significant declines in cigarette use from 19% of kids to 7%. When they compare what happened in that community to what happened in the nation, the United States, over that same period of time, the red line is the United States, the blue line is Franklin County, Massachusetts, and what you can see is the overall slope is greater. We know that drug use is going down in America. It's going down faster and further in CTC community than in the population at large. So how do communities get these results? First of all, I hope that you do take home this simple idea. Opportunity, skills, recognition, build bonding. When you got it, clear standards for behavior important. That's a real key to the success of communities of care. The second thing is that they use a survey, the Communities of Care Use Survey, to measure levels of risk and protection as well as youth self-reported outcomes, to supplement data from law enforcement, from schools, and from the community about these same things. But now we're getting reports from children themselves about their own experiences. Just to show you as an example, here's a community, a high school, looking at 10th grade results from that survey, and they found that poor family management is an elevated risk factor, parental attitudes favorable towards drug use was an elevated risk factor, and favorable attitudes towards drug use among them, young people themselves was an elevated risk factor. And they said, those are the risk factors that we're going to change. We're going to try to change those risk factors in our community. But in a different community, you see a different profile of risk. Those are the same risk factors, but in this community, low neighborhood attachment and community disorganization are elevated risk factors, as well as, again, low perceived risks of drug use and friends' antisocial behavior. And so they chose different risk factors to focus on. This is not one size fits all. This is do the thing that meets the needs of your community. The community select the best evidence-based programs for its unique needs. In the United States, the best registry we have of evidence-based prevention programs is called Blueprints for Healthy Youth Development. If you don't know that website, I'd really encourage you to just remember Blueprints for Healthy Youth Development. That has over 70 test and effective preventive interventions on the website that you can learn all about just from the website itself. And here in Europe, this group is now developing a registry of evidence-based preventive interventions as well. It's really important to implement with fidelity. In the trial, we looked at these ways of monitoring, and when we looked at each of the programs that were implemented in the 12 experimental CTC communities in the trial, what you see is virtually all these programs, with one exception, were implemented quite well. Botfin has done research showing that if you implement life skills training at about a 60% implementation rate, you get 60% of the curriculum done and you do that pretty well, that you will get the effects that he's seen as an experimental trial. All these programs are implemented, with one exception, at better than 60% rate. We can implement programs with fidelity in our communities if we focus on that. So keys to success: involve everyone. We can't do this in silos. The schools have to work with the community people have to work with law enforcement, social service agency people need to be working together on this. We need representatives of all those stakeholders on that community board to make the best decisions. Use this science-based approach. Use the advances of prevention science. We didn't have them 30 years ago. We do now. Use these surveys of young people to assess what kids are really experiencing in the community, not what has risen to the point of official statistics, but what young people are experiencing as their day-to-day experiences. Use the social development strategy, as we said. Use test and effective preventive interventions. This is the other thing I want you to add, just to remember, if you will, from this presentation, and that is, if people say, have you heard about this program, or I've got a great program, I was at this conference over in Malmo the other day, and they had this really interesting program, I learned about it, I got some goodies from the people who developed the program, I want you to say, well, what's the scientific evidence that this program works? Show me the experiment. Show me the test where this program was compared with not getting this program. Not how things were before or after. We know things change over time. But was there a comparison that allows me to say, this program made the difference? And finally, implement chosen interventions with quality, and assess the outcomes every 2 years. Remember that repeating cycle? Well, the idea is that we look again. If the risk factors aren't changing the way we want them to, we may need to do more or different work in order to get those effects or those outcomes. It's really exciting to see people use this operating system. We're now working with over 100 communities in the United States and 15 different states in the US. The state of Colorado has adopted communities of care on a statewide basis, and nearly half the communities that are currently just getting involved in communities of care in the state of Colorado. But internationally, states and communities and nations are adopting communities of care. And then I'm really excited to be here because Malmo, Sweden, is also implementing communities of care. And I was here yesterday at a very exciting event, a kickoff event, in which there are 5 facilitators that are going to be working with 5 neighborhoods of Malmo to implement the communities of care system starting now. So if you're from Malmo and you don't know about this, I want you to talk to either Mats Glans or Brigitte Manson, who are in the front row here, and they're going to be both presenting later during this conference about what's happening in Malmo. I think that's what they're talking about, regarding communities of care, or CTC. You can learn more about them, about what's happening in the first community in Sweden to use communities of care, Malmo, Sweden. So I think that's what I had to say. I hope I did it in the time you needed me to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see if we have a question right on from the audience. You know, it's really, you can use even bad English. I'm a good example that you can make yourself understand. So don't hesitate to bring out your question. Just wait a little bit before we move on. Otherwise, I think I'm going to ask you, firstly, what is the most important insight that policymaker or decision maker need to get from to move towards implementing or accepting this model?
I'd say the first thing is to recognize there is now a science of prevention. There is now prevention science. It is based on high quality research. We don't have to just guess, and we don't have to just take good ideas. We need to use the scientific advances. The second thing I would say that's really important here in Europe, you all have created a social safety network for people. You've created government services that allow people to survive and be healthy, even if they don't have a lot of money, if they don't have a lot of income. That's a really wonderful thing. But it has one disadvantage for community mobilization and activation, and that is often citizens, residents of neighborhoods, rely on the social service providers to do the work for them. And it's really important to have the voice of people who live in that neighborhood as part of the board of that community and part of the structure that is saying, this would work in our community, this is what we need to do. And so don't just rely on human service providers and law enforcement and people to be involved. It's essential that those people are involved, but get neighborhood residents involved as well. That's another really important insight, I think. Those are two important insights.
Can you apply CTC on a more to a more limited extent, for example, in a school or instead of a whole geographical area?
Yes. People have done communities of care in a, people always say, well, what do you mean by community? Well, if you think of a community like Denver, Colorado, that's millions of people. It's great to have the key leaders of Denver supporting initiatives using communities of care. But it's more effective to segment Denver into neighborhoods and to say, okay, this is the neighborhood that we're going to work with, and that we're going to mobilize the service providers and the residents to do. So in Malmo, again, 5 neighborhoods have been identified, and they're geographic neighborhoods where the thing will be done. There are also school communities where schools in New York City, there is a very strong Jewish community that is implementing communities of care in the schools of their community as part of an initiative of their community. So there are different ways you can organize and create the community structure, but there usually needs to be a geographic foundation for this or a service delivery foundation, because if we're going to change the way services are delivered or the services that are going to be delivered, they need to be able to be delivered at that geographic area that we're organizing.
You have been in Sweden before,
yes,
but not in Malmö, actually.
Correct.
So have you been here for several days? So what is your impression? Have you met, you mentioned people that are present here,
yes,
for example. What is the impression about implementing CTC in Malmö?
I would just tell you that I think it is so exciting. I mean, Ulf and Mats came to hear about CTC many years ago when I was here for the Stockholm Prize in Criminology meeting. One of my good friends, David Farrington, was getting that prize. And I was here and presented about CTC. And these guys came from Malmo. And they said, we did a big prevention experiment or project for some years, and we didn't see any results. And we're tired of doing things without results. And these guys came, and they came to the U.S., and they looked and said, let's kick the tires on this thing and see if it really has any air in those tires, whether it roll down the road. And they've been really diligent in first really understanding CTC and could it be applied to Malmo. And then secondly and importantly, in working with the key leaders of this community to help them understand the potential of this system. And so I'm really excited by that. I got to meet the 5 coordinators yesterday who are going to be coordinating the CTC process in those neighborhoods. Those are really exciting people, and it's great to see some of them here today. And so I'm just really impressed with the team that these folks have put together in the city of Malmo for this.
How long should you expect it to take before you can see changes in the, for example, risk factors?
3 years, 2 to 3 years, but I really think that, we were very fortunate. We started the project when the kids were in the 6th grade, at the beginning of the 6th grade, and by the end of the 8th grade, we were seeing results. We used to tell people, you won't see results for 4 years, because we didn't want people to be overly optimistic. We now think you can get those kinds of results in a 3-year period, and both in terms of outcomes and in changes in risk and protective factors.
Let's see if we have a question. No, not yet. May I ask you, Professor, are you staying with us for lunch?
Sure.
Yeah. Can I tell the people that they can approach you during the lunch if they want a little bit more small conversation with you? Mm-hmm. Perfect.
As long as it's in English.
Yeah. I'm sure it will be. So, finally, is there anything that you really want to emphasize as a last message just to the audience that among the things that you told us?
I would emphasize something that I actually didn't say today, but I will say to the people of Malmo who are about to initiate this process, and that is never give up. This is hard work. collaboration is an unnatural thing for people who've been in their silos. And we're going to be collaborating in new ways. And it's going to mean that people are going to say things that you don't like, and you're going to say things that other people don't like. And we can't let that get in the way of our commitment to the healthy development of young people in our community. And I've seen that people can get those past those kinds of things, but I've also seen communities where people have struggled and they didn't make as much progress as they wanted initially, and then they kind of gave up and it petered out. And I really think that if you're going to make the investment in doing it in the first place, do it well, do it right, and never give up.
Never give up. That would be a very good final word. And also maybe have a long-term perspective.
Yes.
Doing this
Yeah.
work.
That's why I showed the Franklin County. Franklin County has been doing this independently. I don't count, I told you about 118 communities. Those are communities we're working with in some way in America. But there are a lot of other communities in the U.S. that are using communities of care. Franklin County, Massachusetts, is one. We haven't been doing anything with them since they got trained in 2003, but they never gave up. They just kept going, and you're seeing these incredible outcomes from them.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Professor Hook.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to have a flower.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
We're very happy to have you at the conference. So thank you very much, sir.